So my first question is, do you ever find yourself running out of time? You have a project going and you run out of time, or do you need more time to get your job finished? I'm guessing that all of you say that yes, you do run out of time because you get interrupted so often. But I think it happens here at the service center. It happens with any job, I think, that you just don't have enough time to do all that you need to do. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this webinar on prioritizing and delegating, because I think all of us can use reminders or maybe some new things that people are doing to help us do a better job at prioritizing and delegating. And so that's why we're doing this one today. Um, so with that, we'll begin. We're going to start with prioritizing. And this is a suggestion that I have for you, that you take this sheet. I'm going to send it out after the webinar today. And then just take a really brief time of recording what you do during your day. And I know that it's probably impossible to write everything because you have kids coming into your office, you have teachers coming into your office all of the time. But basic larger things, write it down on this task sheet, and then do it for 2 or 3 days, depending. Every day is different for all of you. I know that, but just so you can get an idea of what are the things you do at different times during the day. And then at the end of the day, you'll notice the column on the very right-hand side, how many of those tasks that you wrote down were actually totally accomplished. Now, some things have to take more than one day, of course, but how many of your tasks were accomplished? And that will give a good idea of what we're going to do next, okay? So when you're writing down, you can look at this paper and say, okay, what are my priorities? If you collect all of those things on that list, then you can take a look, what are the things that you have to do during the day. But then using a highlighter, I would suggest highlighting, like in green, all of the things that are urgent. So what are things that are really urgent that have to be done right then and there? And then in a different color, highlight what are the things that are important. There's a slight difference between the two. Sometimes it's both urgent and important, but I think it would be good for you to take note of that. And I think you're going to be surprised by how many urgent things you have, and that's why you get stressed out during your day, but also how many important things that you have in a day. So I think it would be a good thing, for a good activity for you to do, to take that sheet and then at the end of the day highlight. And then you can assess the value, because maybe there are tasks that you do that could be delegated, which we'll talk about later. But we're also going to talk about how we can prioritize. So then it will be important to order your tasks by estimated effort. So for example, how much effort does it take for a certain task for you to complete? And we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then is there anything that you can cut out? All right, so this is just a task, a tool that could be used. If you see in the top left-hand corner is a quadrant, and that is where you can take a list after you record all the things you do in 2 or 3 days. Then you can use this and say, okay, what are some of the tasks that I do that are very high importance, but also with high urgency? And those are the things that you know that you have to do every day, and they have to get done. And then in the lower left quadrant, you have low urgency. So maybe they're not as quite, they don't have to get to them right away, but they still are important. So you have to finish them by the end of the day. The top right-hand corner, so those are low importance. So, maybe they don't have to be done today. Or, I mean, they don't have to be as high of an importance, but they are urgent, so they have to be done during the day. And then the very last quadrant in the bottom right-hand corner, those are things that we're going to talk about later that maybe you can delegate, because those are low urgency and low importance. So do they have to be done today? No, you could wait until next week to get them accomplished. Are they important? Yeah, there's something that has to be done maybe, but not as important as doing, like giving medication to a student. Okay? All right. So one thing to consider after you have written down all of your tasks and you have looked at that quadrant, one of the things to consider is when are you at your best? Are you a morning person? Are you an afternoon person? If you're a night person, I get that, but there should be some time during your 8 to 5 day, whatever it is, that you are more focused, you have more energy, you can really stick to a project for a longer period of time. So it's important for you to know that because then you can schedule your priorities, those high urgency, high importance tasks during the time when you have the most energy and most focus. Now, I know that doesn't always happen because you have things that have to be done right away. Like if there's a student that is throwing up in your office, you have to do that right now. But just consider that. When should you schedule those tasks? So let's say that you are a registrar and you are approving applications. Well, you know those are urgent. They need to be done within 24 hours, and they are very important to get the data in my NHA, very accurately. So when is a time during your day that you are most apt to do the best job? Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? You know that when it should be done. And then you can schedule that in your Outlook calendar. That's the next thing. So what times during your day can you utilize on your Outlook calendar? So you just set aside that time and so that no other meetings happen during that time and that people know that this is your dedicated time. And then I'm going to use Nicole, who's at Rollsville, as an example. They actually, at their school, they have a weekly schedule for the OA and the registrar both, where they have a dedicated time where they are away from the front office. And I don't know how much time they spend, an hour or two. So let's say Nicole has Tuesday from 10 until 12 where she goes to another place and she can spend dedicated, uninterrupted time where she can get her projects done. And the same thing for the OA. Maybe her day is on Thursday. But I just thought that was a really good idea. And if it works in your school, great. I would try it to see if that might work for you. And those are the times where you have high priority tasks that you can really focus on. All right, so let's go through some helpful hints. All right. First of all, don't listen to the voice inside your head. And this kind of goes towards those voices that say, "Oh, I can do that later. Oh, I'll have time at 2 o'clock today," instead of your dedicated time. I know we can all have that happen. So for me, the voice inside my head says, "I can get to that later," but it's probably because that's a task that I don't really enjoy or I know is going to take more time than I have or whatever, but that just makes the problem worse. So don't listen to those voices inside your head. And then be honest with yourself. How long is that task going to take? Make sure that you can set aside time and also know that if it takes longer, well, that's okay. Then you'll have to do it again the next day or later. I don't know how many of you can actually spend the first 30 minutes of your day working, but this is true for me. So I know that for me, when I come to work, I often will get distracted either by people talking to people or whatever. And I don't sit down and get to work. Now, some of you get to work, I don't know, 7:30, and then there are parents and students and everything coming in. So you can't sit down and concentrate on some task that you want to do. But let's say you come in at 7 a.m. and there's nobody there. Well, that's your first 30 minutes. Very useful time of the day where you can really get a lot accomplished. Maybe that 30 minutes is at 12:30 after lunch. I don't know, but just know that there's a 30-minute time schedule where you can really get a lot done. All right, then break up projects into smaller pieces. That's pretty obvious. If you have let's say you have a large number of applications to approve, or a large project that always maybe purchasing will take a long time. And you can break that up into smaller pieces so that you have a lot of concentration for that task. And then be realistic with your time. Um, Maybe at the end of your school day, you make a list for yourself so that tomorrow morning when you come in, you have a list of things that you have to accomplish. But it should be realistic, because I know sometimes I make a list and then I get depressed because I don't get through my whole list. And I think that's because I'm not realistic. I don't write down things that could be accomplished in that amount of time. I have a list of 10 things, and realistically, I only have time for 5 of those things. So I have to be realistic in what I can accomplish for the next day. I think the practice of writing down some things the night before, so that when you get to school in the next morning, is really helpful, because it puts your brain into gear right away. All right, so now let's talk about delegating. Delegating can be a tricky thing, especially in the school. I asked before the webinar started, what kinds of things, if you ever delegate, what kinds of things do you delegate? And to whom do you delegate? Can you just write in the text box what things you might delegate? Stuffing envelopes, good. Unplanned tasks, yeah, that's good. Making copies, definitely. Filing weekly grids of teachers, yes. You have a parent ambassador, okay, good. So I want to talk about things that we can and we cannot delegate. But first, I want to talk about why we might not delegate. Um, we often are, if you're, I often say that office staff are really good at their job when they're OCD, because there's so many documents, so many things happening at once. And if you're really a person that is in control of all kinds of things, then you are good at your job. But that also means that we think that we can do it better than somebody else, and that's why we don't delegate. So we'll talk about that in a minute. They might make a mistake. We have to be willing to allow mistakes, and that kind of depends on the job that we delegate. We have a feeling that we might lose control of that project that maybe is near and dear to our heart. We really don't want to give it up, but it might be a good thing for you to do. And then, how many of you feel guilty when you give one of your tasks to someone else? If you have a parent volunteer and you say, "Could you do this?" It's a difficult thing to ask parents to help you out. So those are some reasons why we don't, but Joni says, I never feel guilty. Well, good for you. Awesome. I think that's a really healthy attitude. All right, so what can you delegate? Anything that they can do instead of you, anything that can do at a less cost. So, for example, and I'm going to talk about the cost of time. If you are spending a lot of time, and speaking registrars, if you are spending an awful lot of time at the school, maybe on weekends or late at night, you're staying at school until 8 o'clock, then I think it's time to consider, what can I delegate? Okay. What else can you delegate? Anything that they can do better than you. Believe it or not, there are some people that can do things better than us. It's hard to believe, but yes. Anything they can do earlier than you. So you have a very busy schedule. You're helping students, you're helping people all the time, OAs and registers. So what can they get finished earlier than you if they take it to another room so that you don't have to do it? Anything that will add to their development. Now, I added this just because I know that you have parents that come into your office that, for whatever reason or another, they have not had office experience. They have not had experiencing doing some of those tasks that you can give them. And by you delegating that to them, hey, what better way for training them to maybe have a job in the future? Okay. All right, here are some ideas of what you can delegate. Um, there are things that you shouldn't delegate, and that is when it has to do with anything that has a child's birth date, name, address, phone number. So I know there's a lot of forms, admissions forms, applications, all of that, where you would like to have parents help out, but they should not. Only NHA employees should be handling documents that contain any of that information. It's unfortunate we live in that kind of a world now, but we really need to be careful about information that parents, volunteers see. Okay? So I just wrote down a couple ideas. Alphabetizing commitment to excellence, that just has a signature on it. Scheduling flu shots for staff. I just heard about this one. I didn't know that you in the office had to schedule flu shots for the staff. How many of you do that? Oh, look at all of you. Yes. Oh my goodness. Okay. Scheduling life touch pictures. This can take a lot of time. And I remember when I was teaching, and I know that there were a lot of parent volunteers that were helping to comb kids' hairs and all kids' hair and all of that, which is great. But I think scheduling all and getting all of the documents out to the classrooms, I think is also something that you should delegate. Printing and organizing school newsletters. I know that some of you mentioned that before the webinar started, putting things in mailboxes, teacher mailboxes to hand out. I think that's really a good idea. All right. So I know yesterday there were some people, there were a couple registrars that said, well, we don't have any parent volunteers. This is a task for you. And maybe I know it can be challenging to get those parents in, but I do want to say the more you can get volunteers into your school, the better off you will be, the better off those parents will be, and the students. There are studies that show that students will perform better in a school when their parents are involved in the school. So, you know, what comes first, chicken or the egg? But it is very important to have our parent volunteers help out and be more involved in the school. All right, so then real quickly, what can't you delegate? I touched on this already. Any confidential matters, any documents that have any of that information on it. Um, Approving applications, that should only be the registrar. Sometimes always help out when registrars aren't there. Sometimes always help out anyway. But any entering of data into my NHA, they shouldn't have your password. They shouldn't be able to use your account in my NHA. Medication distribution. Now, I know this is kind of a touchy subject because either the OA is out, the registrar is out, you need help in the office, whatever. But medication distribution should only be done by an NHA employee. All right, and then cumulative files. Um, I know that cumulative files can take a lot of work, and one of the things that parents can do, parent volunteers, you know those cumulative files, they come and they're not folded. You can have them fold the cumulative files, that you can put a name on it, they can put the tabs into the cumulative files, but any documents that go into cumulative files should not be done by a parent because that is against all FERPA regulations. Okay? All right. Registration letters for the parent portal is also something that they can do. Um, all right. So let's talk about some guidelines of when to delegate. So picking the right person, sometimes you don't have a choice very much, but you know the task that you would like the volunteer to complete. So try to get to know the volunteer, try to get to know their strengths or their weaknesses and pick the right person for the task. Otherwise, you know that it ends up being more work for you instead of helpful. All right, then explain the desired result. So what is your end result that you would like? Sometimes we assume more than we should that they would know what we have in mind, but they really don't. And then give written instructions as well. Provide an example. So let's say that you're having them put together a binder with the cover in it and tabs in it. Give them an example and say, well, this is what it should look like. This is what I would like. And that will really help them. And then give them the written instructions so that if it's a lot of things that they have to do, they can look back at it. And then you can be specific on those written instructions, but then give them the freedom to act. Help them to learn by their mistakes. And yes, there will be mistakes, but um, give them the freedom to do. Maybe they have other creative ideas that may make the task easier or more efficient or more creative. Okay. And then I would suggest just set a time after 5 or 10 minutes after they have started. This is a brand new volunteer. And then check in on them and just to make sure that they are going down the right path because you don't want them to get finished with the task and it's a mess. It's not the way you wanted it, right? So just check in with them after 5 minutes or 10 minutes and then hopefully you can give them any constructive feedback that's needed. And then if it's a big project, set a time for the person to inform you on progress. So let's say after you've checked in for 5 minutes, then say to them, okay, could you just check in with me in like an hour and let me know how you're doing? That way you know if they're running into problems, and that way you won't get interrupted as well. Because if you don't tell them that, they might come in 15 minutes and 20 minutes and 25 minutes, and then once again, it proves to be more work than you wanted it to be. Okay? Give a final deadline when the project should be finished. All right, anything else you want to add about delegating? I would love to hear from you as well. If you have done some delegating, what are some tips that you have, or what are some frustrations that you've run into? Teresa said, not done as neatly as I do it. Yep, that is a thing that you might run into. Are there creative ways that you can ask them to do it a little differently, or that's probably something where you need to just think about yourself. Is there, if it's a stack of paper that's all in a mess, you can straighten up the papers. I mean, each task has its own things. Is there value in asking is the value more than the hassle of it not being done right? I guess that's the question. Joni, that's great. You hired your parent ambassador. Nice. Time saved is more important. Yep, Teresa, it's good to hear. Christina, that's a good point. So when you start delegating things out, um, you get more things put in your lap, right? Joni says build relationships with your parents. Yes, for many, many reasons, it's important to build those relationships. But in the delegating thing, once you build relationships with them, you get to know their strengths and you get to know what they like and don't like. Maybe they're creative and they can help you with some creativity, or maybe they are super organized. And so you give them those super organized tasks. Okay, well, thank you. I would suggest if you do have more ideas for delegating or even prioritizing, please use Yammer. That's a great place for you to post some ideas of what you have learned about prioritizing or delegating, or if you have a question. All right, so I'm going to go on to just the January reminders. We have a lot of things happening in January. You should have noticed in the enrollment updates that there is an option for student withdrawals, and it shouldn't be, there's no option for a future date. Okay, so it should be the present date, and pay close attention to your particular state as to what that date should be. All right, retention sheets. How many of you have handed out your retention sheets, and maybe you have even had some teachers return their sheets to you? Wonderful. Awesome. I'm going to reply very quickly to the person who said, you quickly learn who doesn't know how to alphabetize. We do have an alphabetizer. If you don't have one, you should look on Staples and order an alphabetizer because those are wonderful things. Okay, so with your retention sheets, I suggest that you have those handed in maybe 2 weeks before the end of open enrollment, because then if there's anything that anything that has to be done with you or not, Danielle is sending me a note because it shouldn't be 2 weeks before, I'm guessing. It was an up Periscope. Okay, sorry. All right. Well, maybe you have, I was going to suggest January 14, but January 18 was an up Periscope. So let's go with that. Okay, re-enrollment forms, the same thing. Give yourself some time to get all those re-enrollment forms handed in, and then you can process them in MindHA. And also, when you get those, if especially hard copies, but also online, your leadership team has a chance to call them before the end of open enrollment. How are we doing on re-enrollment forms? Last month, I mentioned that there was a registrar who was asking every parent that came into the office, hey, have you done your re-enrollment form? If not, let me show you how to do it online. And so she's up to, I think, 56 parents that did it online. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but hey, that's a lot more than she had before. So that's wonderful. Okay. And the next thing is lottery training and the regional workshops. The lottery training is for those people that are new and also for those people that maybe haven't had a lottery for a while and they're going to have a lottery. I know that's true for a couple of people, or if you would just like a refresher. The regional workshops also, I want to encourage everybody to attend those. The only thing I would like to say is that if you are attending lottery training, then you don't need to sign up for the workshop because we're going to cover some of the things at lottery training that we covered during the workshops. So if you have signed up for both, then I suggest you send me an email, and I'll probably email you as well, that you only should attend one of those. The registration links are on the enrollment updates email that I sent out, but it's also on the enrollment site. Keisha, the OAs can attend the workshop if it's okay with the principal. I can talk to you about that offline, okay? All right, then also on-course videos are coming up. This is just a reminder, we have on-course videos specifically for end of open enrollment and for videos, and I think it's important for everybody to watch those because this only comes once a year and there's a lot of good reminders on those videos. Okay? All right. Any last questions or comments about January updates? Oh, I have one more thing for January. I forgot to put it on my screen. The waitlist reapply letters. Waitlist reapply letters, some of you have asked about this. Those don't appear in letter management until 30 days before the end of open enrollment. So you may be able to see them now. States that have a later end of open enrollment, you won't be able to see them yet. But those are important to send out. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.